Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. This episode is brought to you by my friends over at the Fez Agency. Did you all know that Portugal is currently ranked the #1 country in the world for remote workers? Yeah, that's right, #1 in the entire world. With the beautiful weather mixed with the history, friendly people, incredible coastline, and awesome cuisine, it is really easy to understand why. And in fact, some of our most popular episodes here on About Abroad are about Portugal. So I already know that you all love it, and I'm not going to waste your time trying to convince you to go visit. But what I will try to convince you of is planning your next company retreat there. And when you do, to use the Fez Agency. Fez Agency is local, right there from Porto, with people on the ground to help you plan your company retreat. They can map out every single detail of your offsite anywhere in the country of Portugal. So that way you can arrive, you can unwind and recharge with your teammates without the stress. You all know you love it there. I know you'll love it there. So let's get your team there. And the next time you're planning a company offsite, consider Portugal and then contact my friends over at the Fez Agency to make it happen. You can visit them via the link in the show notes. My guest today is Orest Zub. He is doing something which I think is really admirable and taking us inside what life is like in Ukraine right now. Orest is originally from the Ukraine and has spent the last several years as a full-time digital nomad and entrepreneur. He's traveled to more than 120 countries and has been one of those travel enthusiasts that's become well-known around the world for his insights on global mobility and travel and just all things that we would normally talk about on this show. But today we're talking about something much more serious, much more relevant, and that is the situation in Ukraine. He's gone back to his home country to cover it from the ground and put his skill set to use in helping to keep this story alive. So I was very thankful to Orest for his lengthy amount of time that he spent with me today, for his personal insights, and for sharing what is obviously some very challenging information, but he's willing to do it and does it like nobody else. So thank you, Orest, ahead of time for joining me, and I hope all of you will enjoy this one and learn something from it. I certainly did. Please help me in welcoming Orest to About Abroad. Orest, good to see you again, man. I really appreciate you taking some time to join the show.
Absolutely. Thanks to see you and nice to see you again.
It sounds good. So, we were talking a little bit backstage before hitting record here, and this will be a different type of episode than we've done in a while here on About Abroad. We're typically chatting about people traveling the world and living abroad and being a digital nomad. And I feel like under normal circumstances, you and I could have that conversation just like any other episode, but we're living in different times, and especially the people like yourself that are from the Ukraine are experiencing something very different. So we're going to travel down a different path and learn about what life is like in Ukraine these days and get your unique perspective. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for being willing to share and take us on that journey.
My pleasure. And it also means a lot that you're interested in the topic, because as I did today on my Instagram, and thanks for you for sharing this in the stories, that the volume of the news kind of like fades away a little bit. So it's also my job to keep the perspective and to keep the awareness of people about what's happening around, right? So thank you for being particularly interested in this topic about Ukraine in general.
Yeah. I mean, I've actually, it was so timely that you shared that. And for like a little bit of context for anybody that may have not seen this on one of our social media accounts here, I mean, what did you say? It was like the focus. Let me ask you to share the statistic. It's dropped by like 22%, 22 times or something like that, right?
Yeah, I think like it's a broader topic in general of modern media and modern attention of users, that like when we are using different like social media channels, tools, it kind of goes the direction that the span of attention is becoming shorter. And sometimes it just goes where it absolutely doesn't make any sense, that people cannot simply stop for a couple of minutes just to dig a little bit deeper to understand understand at least the topic. That's like a general part, yes. And even in such important issues as war, as events that really shape our world. One of my friends recently made a comment on my post that the war in the mind of people is actually have a lifespan of only 40 days. And that's what we are seeing now, that in the end of February, when Ukraine became the victim of the Russian aggression, like everybody just, exploded, and we're like talking about this. And now it's already over than 100 days since the start of the full-scale war happened. We see that the volume of news about Ukraine is going down, even though historically it was the best, like the biggest media represented topic, like out of all military conflicts out there, right? But even this is going like down, and so far there is stats that engagement in the social media decreased like 22 times in comparison with the late February. This really puts perspective on different thoughts, and obviously by conducting such interviews, we are doing our best to keep the awareness, because that's like really important issue nowadays.
Yeah, and I can't help but I know this is going to be speculating a little bit, but I mean, we're just a little podcast here. We can just do whatever we want, I guess, and that's okay. Like, I have to kind of imagine that the leaders behind these aggressive movements, they know this sort of thing, right? So like they know that our attention span is becoming shorter, and if they can get through these, say 40 days, if that's the scientific number we want to pick, they know that the attention, the focus is going to wane a little bit. And I think that's why it's uber important that people like yourself, who are on the ground there sharing the story, continuing to report on this, keep it amplified in the media to prevent that from happening, to prevent it from becoming a situation where it's easy to kind of sweep this under the rug and people start focusing elsewhere.
Yeah. And it's also like, I also don't want to speculate on the Ukrainian issue, even though this is very relative to me, but this is organical for the entire media industry. Can also put parallels here with the COVID. Like COVID was like something unbelievable in the very beginning, and then people were going like to the curfews, they couldn't leave home, and eventually it became kind of normal after a couple of months, even though it would be insane even to think about this like 2 years ago. So that's like a normal human approach to the changes. And by all of this situation, I can say that humans are such creatures that are very adaptable to many things. And this is like a blessing and a curse for us at the same moment. So there are different points of view on this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is fascinating in its own right. And then at the same time, it's hard to use that word when we're talking about, like, in this case, this has real effect on real human beings. And for that reason, it's important that this stays at the top of people's minds, that we don't get lulled to sleep by the media cycle and just kind of start accepting this as the new normal. What's happening in Ukraine right now is not the new normal. It shouldn't be. And if we start to believe that, everything's just okay because we're not hearing about it, or that things are getting better, this is a terribly vicious cycle.
Yes. I am very grateful for this point of view from you, because in fact, situation in Ukraine is kind of worsening. So even though the news volume is going down, the activity of military engagement is growing. Yes. The fact that northern areas of our country, including Kyiv, and its surroundings got liberated doesn't mean that the war is de-escalating. Yes, the main fights moved to the east, to Donbas area. And at this very moment, at these days that we are talking now, the fight is very, very serious. So we are talking about the pictures from the World War II with the tanks, trenches, artillery, which is something not possible to something we see only in movies, and that's really terrifying.
Yeah, it is. I think it is still hard. I have to admit, like when you talk to people, I'm here in Europe. I'm not that far from you, and I think when you talk to people on the ground and you go out for dinner or you meet up with a friend or something, it's hard to imagine that is actually happening for us. I mean, I've had these real conversations with people from various corners of the world who are just like, it is hard for me to accept that this is happening in today's modern age. Exactly as you just said. I think I've literally heard that same phrase used before, where it's like, this is something out of the World War II movies, or this is something out of those, the books from the history books and that we learned about in school. This doesn't happen today. There's not invasions happening today in Europe and civilized countries, and yet here it is happening. And I think people are still trying to figure out how to process this in some way, even though, as you said, it's been over 100 days now.
You won't believe, but I'm in Ukraine. I'm in Lviv, my native city. This is the westernmost large city in Ukraine. And if you would come to Lviv not knowing that there is war in the country, you would not have any single reason to believe in this, because the city is functioning absolutely like normally as it would be in the warring country. Public transport is operating according to the schedule. All the restaurants are full. The only difference is that from time to time you can see people in a military uniform on the streets, and our airport is not operating. That's it. Otherwise, it's functioning as a normal city. But you can just drive a couple of hours to the east, let's say to central Ukraine, and you start seeing the difference. For example, Kyiv, the capital, has many roadblocks on the streets, and half population is out of the city, which is the capital, right? And even if you travel further to the east, then you start seeing ghost towns and the active war zone. So that's the reality what we are living. And the fact you told that it's hard to believe that something like this happened in the 21st century in Europe, it is hard. But at the same moment, if you learn history, and this is our biggest teacher, yes, in life, not long time ago, Europe was shaken by the Yugoslav wars. Yugoslavia, before the separation of the country, was, let's say, the most liberal and the prosperous country out of the social bloc. Europeans were enjoying the seaside of Croatia in the 70s and the 80s. And then during the entire decade of the 90s, over 100,000 casualties happened there because of these different complicated military conflicts that happened in Yugoslavia. And I'm actually now studying a lot just to have the perspective of our conflict now in Ukraine, to understand things better, and at least somehow possible to prepare myself and to predict what would happen. So that's very good explanation. Also, if you think of World War II and the Holocaust and other things that happened during Second World War, in the 30s, Germany was one of the most prosperous and scientifically and technically advanced country in the world, with lectures, with doctors, with huge achievements in science and sport. But still, it led into completely wild direction. The longer we live, the more we can study, and it's just impressive how things can change upside down in 1 second.
Yeah, we can, as you said, in some ways it's unimaginable, and in other ways there's ways to look backwards and sort of predict some of these things with hindsight. And, the CEO of my company, the company that I work at full time, Duist, his name's Amir. He was a refugee of that crisis, that war, and in Bosnia and Croatia and Yugoslavia. And he ended up, this situation in Ukraine has really affected him. We've had some personal discussions on it. And, without going into that, I know that it's been really hard for him seeing some of the refugee crisis that's come from Ukraine and reminiscing on what that was like for him as a 8-year-old, 10-year-old, however old he was exactly, working his way through Europe to eventually land in Denmark as a full-time refugee. So that wasn't that long ago. The point in that story is that, he's about my age, and this is bringing up memories for him from his childhood when he was fleeing a war that was happening right here in our backyard in Europe. So yeah, in some ways, it's it's kind of ridiculous that we can't better foresee these sorts of things happening when they're building up. Because although it sort of seems like it happened out of nowhere, there were steps that were taken, for months and years leading up to this. I think you touched on this recently as well.
Yeah. On our podcast that we did together with the Safety Wing, yes, where both of us were the panelists. We were touching the topic of how to respond to the crisis in terms of war, environmental issues, and COVID as well. And I think most of your listeners, they at least heard about the book, the great book about predicting an inevitable crisis, which is a black swan. And if you read through it, and if you think about it a little bit deeper, you kind of start realizing that how stupid can you be at one side, but on another side, humans are such beings that they hope until very end that it's not going to happen, but it's still happening. So that's so the situation in Ukraine and in Bosnia and other many issues around the world is just the pure example of the black swan. So that could be one of the first takeaways for your listeners from this interview. Just order the book and read it. Yeah.
The first actionable that we're giving you out of this is just go order Black Swan. I would love to come. This is going to seem kind of weird, actually, as I'm thinking through it, but I would kind of love to come back to Ukraine in a second. And I would really like to set the stage for people who don't know you personally. I mean, I've started following your work since we were introduced recently, and it's very impressive. You obviously have a long history as a digital nomad and world traveler, and so I think it could be useful and interesting to kind of dive into your background and what the last several years of your life looked like from a global standpoint, and then we'll get back around to how you've landed back home and what you're doing here. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to introduce. So I was born in Lviv, Ukraine. Yes, it was still like times of the Soviet Union. So I'm talking about like 87. But still, I'm the product, and I grew up in the independent Ukraine. So I never experienced the Soviet Union itself. My parents were smart enough to invest into my education from the early age. So basically, I started learning English in Ukraine in the 90s when I had like 6-7 years old, which was a pretty unique situation for our country back then. And during the university times, during the entire 2000s, I've been traveling around Europe very actively. As a law student, I was participating in different NGOs, in student exchange programs, and so on. So by the end of 2000s, I visited over 30 countries around Europe. And by the time I graduated, I decided like, okay, I want to pursue this exploring the world and seeing the best of it before landing the regular job. So I did a few internships in Poland, Croatia, and India as a legal assistant. And in 2010, I came back from India with the pure intention to find a way to make a living in order to travel the world. Yeah, so it was like the early stage of the idea of digital nomadism, and laptops were much bigger back then. I didn't have a smartphone and so on. Yes, but it took me like 2 years to figure things out. And since 2012, all the way until now, I can say I am like a classic digital nomad guy. So we traveled together with my wife since then. She was still my girlfriend, and we visited together around 90 countries as a couple. I did myself over 120 countries. And we stayed long term in many different countries, like in Asia, in Latin America, in the US, Mexico, India, Argentina, Thailand, Bali, so I think I started living the digital nomad life a couple of years before this term became mainstream. So somewhere in 2015, 16, I read some articles, and the digital nomad was kind of like up and running at that moment. So I read it like, oh, like that's what I'm doing already like for 4 years. So that's like the long story short from my travel. But in terms of the practical approach, how I was making this sustainable and financing is that in 2011, I did my first blog, ukrainetravelsecrets.com, which is a English language travel site about Ukraine. It was just before 2012 when Ukraine and Poland hosted a football championship. So the information was in the big demand, and very quickly I organized a successful travel business, which was my main source of income until 2014. So basically during the summer season, I was providing travel services to clients that I obtained through my website, and winters we were spending somewhere in a warmer climates closer to the equator. Then in 2014, Russia invaded Ukraine with annexing Crimea and starting the initial stage of the war in Donbass. So the travel business like completely collapsed. But however, by that time, I already understood how online marketing things work. And I started the consulting business for Ukrainian colleague, openmind.com.ua. And since then, until this war, that was my main business. It became pretty successful also. I became one of the influencers in this lifestyle topic in Ukraine. I could say that I contributed to the digital nomad movement in my country with all the events, trips, reaching the audience of over 100,000 people in general. Yes, and was relying for the last 4 years to different like marketing and advertisement campaigns. On another side, 60% of I was doing was a membership platform for small entrepreneurs in Ukraine. So that one, yes. So I kind of like became pretty confident in these areas, following the main trends in the online marketing topics in the global market and so on. And life was good. Everything was like really fine. However, now, like when the war in Ukraine started, I decided that I will apply my skills in marketing and media and will completely shift the focuses of our team to maintain the media support of the war issues in Ukraine in order to keep the awareness and in order to somehow prevent this media decline that we were talking in the very beginning of this podcast. So at the moment, this is my main focus. Also, I use my international network in order to continue receiving support to Ukraine. That's why I'm in touch with guys like you. Like every day, almost I conduct different interviews, giving like guest lectures in order to speak the word out, and also participating actively in the global digital nomad community to keep people with Ukraine. So just 2 weeks ago, I came back from the trip to Croatia, where I visited 2 events for digital nomads. And so that was what I'm doing. In 2 weeks again, I'm going to Bansko, to like probably the largest digital nomad event in Europe. Yeah, there will be a big festival for nomads, and I'll be talking about Ukraine. So that's my mission at the moment. Yeah.
Was that a hard sacrifice in a way to make? Like, I mean, to shift from a very personal, business focused mindset of, a business that supports you and your lifestyle to sort of going on like a PR campaign for Ukraine, which I think is obviously commendable. I wonder if it was challenging for you to make that decision.
It was not challenging at all. It was a no-brainer for me. First of all, because of some historical issues. For example, in 2014, when there was the Orange Revolution, there was another revolution in Ukraine. Yes, the Euromaidan revolution. I was nomading in Mexico. So basically, I missed the revolution in Ukraine of 2004 while being in Puerto Escondido in an amazing beach town. And when it all started, I was just following events online, being anxious, feeling like you're not belonging to your society that are living through this moment. And I felt really like low. So anticipating the war of Ukraine, I was also traveling around. I clearly knew that I'm going to actively participate in the resistance. That's why actually I arrived to Ukraine from my travels 4 days before the invasion. Actually, I was I was in Azerbaijan, and I know like many other people who had tickets for my plane, but they simply didn't take a plane. But for me, it was a conscious decision just to come back. By that time, I didn't understand what we are really facing, because knowing the war from movies or from books is different than experiencing it. So we can talk about this a little bit later. However, it was pure decision, and I completely don't feel I'm sacrificing something. I feel privileged to be part of this movement, of this resistance, and to belong to the future of our country, because we are like really on the light, on the side of the light. So yeah.
I think it's super commendable in a lot of ways, but I really respect the decision that you took there. I mean, I can imagine how you were feeling in that first instance, and then seeing sort of an opportunity, saying, I built up this following, I'm well known in this space, and I can put that to a greater good is a pretty awesome thing.
Absolutely. Also, like, first of all, I don't see any sense at the moment to do anything else. Like, how can I just, where should I go? Will I go to Croatia or Portugal and do what? Like online marketing at the moment? Like, this is just completely out of reality for me. So in this situation, I simply don't see sense going somewhere and continue like regular online marketing or other business related topics, because I don't see sense. Like it would mean completely change your life, detach yourself from your people, from your homeland, from your history, and do something else. When the war started, at least 50 different people from all around the world wrote to me like, Orest, you should get out. We have a place for you. You can stay as long as you want, but like it's not an option for me at all. Like my place is here. I'm doing everything I can to help my country, and it's not even about Ukraine itself. It's about like the dignity of yourself, right? So that's the idea, and also I understand that I am able to use my superpower, my previously developed assets for good. This one,
that feels good too, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's nice. Like, we all want to use what the skills that we're being given and put them to a greater good, I think. And so, yeah, that's nice to see that you've managed to do that. And I wondered if you could take us inside what does your day to day look like now, focusing on you first, and then we can kind of expand out to the greater Ukraine. But what are you doing day to day to try to keep the this conversation going, and what does that look like, just in general for you day to day?
Okay, so first of all, there is no problem with motivation or procrastination. Like those topics don't matter anymore because there is enough internal power to get awake and to do this like almost nonstop. So our team and me personally, we are focused on spreading the word, yes, on continuing media support. What does it mean? When the war started, I set up a brand new English language profiles to spread the message because I am established like a blogger in Ukraine in Ukrainian language. So that was like a big shift for us to do, which means YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Yes. So we produce videos about Ukraine, about events in Ukraine from the local perspective, starting from the day one of the war. Yeah. Our rhythm, our pace is around 2-3 videos per week, which keeps both of my guys, editors busy full time. Also, there are publications in the social media almost on a daily basis, which I do by myself. And the content there is regarding the issues happened in Ukraine. So first month, it was about the events in Lviv and how I care about my family and most of the housekeeping things to prepare for the challenges we are facing. And then I traveled to the north of Ukraine, the areas which were under occupation by Russian forces, and they got liberated, meaning Ukrainian army fought back and Russian army has to retreat. So basically you visit the areas with destroyed villages, you interview people, you start collecting the evidences of the war crimes, which is very, very close to war reporting and classic journalism. However, since I originate from blogging, my material has this kind of crafty style that doesn't fit into the classic journalism, and no media would buy some pieces of my material. That's why I developed my own audience, and as a blogger, develop relations with the audience. Yes, so I don't try to reach the widest possible audience, and I don't have capabilities to do so. However, I play on the level of explaining things. So let's say if the largest media, they just tell mass killings in Ukraine and they put the name of the city, then I travel to the city and I explain where the city is located, how the Russian forces were retreating, when what exactly and under which circumstances happened situation to this family and so on. So I'm working on this middle level of understanding the situation, right? So that one also almost on a daily basis, as I told, I conduct different interviews and guest lectures from Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Australia, time belts all the way to the western coast of the United States, which usually means I have to wake up in the middle of the night to do this. And another front, what I'm doing is that I do the representation. Since I have many contacts all around the world, I apply to the conferences or they invite me and I travel to those places, even personally in many cases, just to talk about the event. And of course, your physical presence and personal interaction with people makes much bigger impact than just another video. So that's a lot of work, and yeah, this keeps me occupied pretty much all my time.
I was going to ask, do you sleep at all, or have you just said I'm just not going to do that for the foreseeable future?
Now it's much better. The first month, I was taking pills just to sleep, and even though there was not enough time to do so, but yeah, now it's kind of you are into routine, and you understand that you're not going to dump in a good sense, everything you want to say in 1 second. So I simply, I work at the pace as I can, and we understand that it's a marathon. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's not going to finish in 1 or 2 months. Yeah.
Is there any one of those phases? You talked about sort of the phases that you've focused on thus far in the story, maybe for lack of a better word, but in the drama that we're watching unfold, there's been a couple different chapters, I guess, already. Has there been any one of those that was especially challenging for you, being from the Ukraine, or has it just all sort of blended together? Anything that sort of, I guess, surprised you about what's unfolded so far and how it's affected you or the people around you, or do you sort of just see it all as this one long kind of blended together scene?
Definitely there are different levels of how you react on things. And I told you about the moment that I arrived to Ukraine 4 days before the invasion, right? So that was time when the governments of all the countries were screaming to their citizens to leave Ukraine, and many of my local friends, expats, they were kind of like evacuating already. I arrived to Ukraine knowing that I am going to stay with my family at least, and then, with seeing what will happen. But when the actual invasion happened, and I just want to remind you how it happened, and in one night, in the night of February 24th, there was a massive full-scale missile attack on Ukraine when 70 different targets all around the country have been attacked within a span of a couple of hours. So this is probably the biggest single airstrike attack in the history. And Ukraine, this is the country, like the largest European country. Like it's larger than Spain. I assume you're in Spain at the moment. It's larger than continental France. It's like almost twice the size of Germany or Italy. So just like understanding the scale of it was hard to process. And when this happened in a single night, you have like 40 million people in panic at one moment, with all the traffic on the roads, with at least 10 million people from the east of Ukraine running away from the Russian land invasion that followed the airstrike attack. That was like just so much overwhelming that people became crazy. Like when you cannot take your cash from the ATM because it's out of stock and so on. So I think nobody was ready for that. That was just too much. And you have a constant fear that the next missile can come can target you personally. So most of people in the country had the feeling that they can die in the next hour. And that's really scary. Like this is that I was not ready for, right? When I felt I am coming back. However, like the time cures scars, right? So let's say in a week, when you realize that most probably you're not going to die in the next couple of hours, your brain starts think more rationally, and you start to put yourself back together and do something. Yeah, do something with logic. So that's when I called all of my team to ask what they are doing. Some of them were fleeing, some of them were changing location, some of them were just in shock. That's like when you took care of your family and the basic survival need. Like, for example, I live in a beautiful, it's the standard of Prague and Budapest. Nice modern apartment, everything is cool, but we have to put tape on our windows in case of explosion outside so we don't get hurt. And being threatened that the city services might stop, we kept our bath tube always with water. Yeah, so these are the basics, how low you go, right? Then once you have the airstrike alarm, everybody is rushing down to the bunkers, and bunkers are the basements of the buildings, right?
Were those were already there? Like why are there bunkers already? Are they there from history, or
no,
are there?
These are not bunkers. The bunkers are adapted basements of the building.
Got it.
So you have the building and the basement, or like in more modern buildings, the underground parking. Like this is the shell. For the first 3 weeks, I was sleeping in the corridor with my wife because it's the corridor is a little bit more inside the building, so it means it's protected by two walls from the outside. Yes, so if there is like explosion outside, you have more chances to survive. And then the easiest part for me, and this is the sarcastic moment, is that I had to pack all my belongings into the one carry-on luggage size backpack. And when I was leaving home to buy something, I was carrying it with me in case of emergency evacuation.
Wow.
But that was easy because I'm a digital nomad, right?
You're kind of prepared on some level for this.
Correct. Yeah. So this period was happening for a couple of the first weeks. And then when you realize that first that you understand that the possibility of being hit by the long-range missile going all the way from Russia is very low because there are simply not so many missiles to do this, and they use them mostly to target the military object. And that the worst destruction, what we see on the TV, is possible to do only from the land artillery, meaning that the land army with tanks and, these mortars has to approach the city to at least 25-30 kilometers from where they are able to target the structures with this volume that only land artillery can provide. Like you simply cannot shoot that many long-range missiles because it will be too expensive to destroy the entire neighborhoods. Yes, this is only possible if 100 mortars stand near the city. And when you realize that geography matters and the land army is not moving 500 kilometers per day, they're moving like 5 or 10 kilometers per day, say. This makes the situation more or less predictable, and you start being more calm, being further from the front. And that's why now many cities in the west of Ukraine can look completely healthy, while the eastern cities are like the war zone, unfortunately. But these kind of feelings you live through, and just you become smarter, and you take some measures how to live with that.
Yeah, that's the incredible thing, is hearing the somewhat normalcy with the way that you can describe these situations now, like sleeping in the corridor, or like, oh, we just walked down to the bunker. I mean, to be clear, this isn't something you lived through at any other stage in your life, or living somewhere else. This is still a new phenomenon, a new world that you're living in, correct?
Yeah. Ukrainians in general are very peaceful people, and it's very safe. It was always very safe here. Like, let's say, I can assure you, you're from Valencia, right? You are staying in Valencia, as I understand, most of the time. So the petty crime in Ukrainian cities is much on a lower scale than in the coastal cities of Spain, for example.
Wow.
Like, absolutely, yeah. And the war that our people are facing now, this is something obviously nobody was ready for. However, as we see now, the army did some great job, and the fact that Ukraine resisted for the first week, and most of the people around the world, they were counting days when our country will fall, but Ukraine resisted, gives a message to the rest of the world that these guys are fighting their best, and let's help them. And that what provoked also unprecedented situation in the history, when the entire world united around one single country who simply protect their own right to survive. And we are super grateful for that. And now we see that the only outcome can be a victory of Ukraine.
We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This season is brought to you by my good friends over at Insured Nomads. They're the absolute best in the business when it comes to providing health, travel, and medical insurance for nomads, expats, and really just all forms of world travelers. I know insurance is often something that's overlooked when we're fantasizing about traveling the world, but it's absolutely necessity that we address this, because often the policy you have in your home country isn't going to cover you while you're abroad. And it's also a requirement, as a lot of people may not realize, to actually buy private travel or expat insurance, as it's called sometimes, to obtain a visa or even enter certain countries. So fortunately, there are companies like Insured Nomads to help us with this. Not only do they have excellent coverage and great prices, but they're also providing a first-class experience with additional perks and best-in-class technology via their app. It's an amazing experience. I can't recommend it enough. Now, this is a company that was built by world travelers for world travelers, so they know what it's like to find yourself in a difficult medical situation abroad, and they want to keep you from having that same bad experience. So the next time you're planning a trip abroad, whether it's for a week or a lifetime, check out Insured Nomads via the link in the show notes. If you've made it this far into the episode and you're still enjoying yourself, then I would love to ask a quick favor. Open up the app that you're using to listen to this podcast and leave a quick review. You can do this in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and really just about any platform that allows podcast listening now. If you can't find that in the interface of the app, then scroll down in the show notes and find ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, and you should be able to leave it from there. Thanks so much, guys. We really appreciate it and hope you enjoy the rest of the show. I wanted to ask you about 2 or 3 different things that you just summarized so nicely in one or two sentences there. So let me back up and ask them one by one. First of all, I'm very curious to hear from your standpoint what the perception is from the Ukrainian people. And I know I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of everybody, but from your perspective, what is the general sense that people have looking outwards to the rest of the world? Is there you mentioned there's a sense of gratitude. I've actually wondered, is there, thanks for the help, but we could use a lot more. You are just standing by and watching some of this happen. So what is your take on that? What do you think people feel when you're speaking to them on the ground?
You remember there was a time at the very beginning of the war when there was a large campaign.
A no-fly zone, I think, right?
Yeah, no-fly zone, yes. So many Ukrainians, they got kind of frustrated, why the West doesn't do this? So obvious that we are victims, and if you could cover the sky, then we would do all the dirty job in the land. And I also understand why the West did not do this. Also, many people, they expect a much faster delivery of the heavy weapon. That is actually happening now as well, but it could be faster. But if I analyze things, I realize that it is unprecedented situation when the entire world is united around Ukraine. Yes, not ever in history was the precedent when it was so clear between black and white, and when everybody just united behind one underdog. And this is the story of David and Goliath, the story of underdog, when the obviously weaker guy is craving, is doing his best to protect himself. And when this guy is not simply surrendering, but if this person is doing everything in his power and even impossible things, then the rest of the group is like, okay, he probably deserves some help. So we received this help, and I am very grateful for this. I understand that even for such slow movers as the European Union, this was always also a big shake. Europe got united, NATO got united, and yeah, I think this is positive. Like from the historical perspective, if we don't think sensu stricto about lives, people dying, and we have to think about this, yes, but this is like the narrow point of view, and this is very bad. But from the historical and the perspective of civilization, I see this is actually a positive movement of to make the population more democratic, to liberalize the countries, yes, and simply to make a world a better place. The problem here is that freedom is not free. You have to fight for it, but those are the processes, those are the historical movements that United States was going in the late 18th century, yes, that Western Europe was going through 150 years ago. Many countries in Eastern Europe were going through this period like 30 years ago or the start of the 20th century. And now is simply the turn of Ukraine to do so. So I see logic from the wider perspective of on all of these events. And it's really surprise how the world united around Ukraine. Yeah, so I'm grateful for that, absolutely.
That uniting across the world is totally unprecedented, and maybe doesn't get enough credit or enough coverage in the mainstream media. You just put it really nicely. This is something that we've never really seen before, and I mean, we're both relatively young guys. I like to think so, at least. I don't know. So we haven't seen this in our lifetimes, where there is just this unified front across the entire globe saying this is wrong. And I know it can be easy for you and I from our standpoints to say, well, yeah, obviously, but the world isn't that simple. It's normally much more complex than that. So I wonder what it is about this situation that makes it so easy isn't the right word, but so easily unifiable for the entire world. I mean, how is it that we've all bound together and said, yes, we unequivocally can say this is bad? I mean, even in other conflicts, wars in the past, there's been two sides to the story, and it doesn't really seem like in this case there's another side to the story.
Yeah. So of course there is explanation for that. So it's important to tell that first of all, Ukraine receives unprecedented unilateral support from the world. Also, it is the most widely media represented military conflict out of all conflicts actually happening now in Ukraine. So sometimes since I started to reach out to the global audience, I receive messages from some people that why everybody's talking about Ukraine? There is war in Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, and a bunch of other military conflicts around the world. And this is true, but there is a reason why Ukraine receives this support. First of all, this is very clear who is a victim and who is aggressor. Yeah, in many conflicts, even in the Yugoslav conflict that we already touched, it was still this, mess with different malicious groups between each other. And for the regular person, it was hard to figure out who is who. In this situation, we clearly see that one country openly invaded another sovereign state. And this cannot be justified by anything. There was not even a situation when, there is some kind of provocation. Because in many wars, in order to justify your invasion, the governments, they make some kind of provocation that, okay, they attacked us first and then we responded, and it was the only way to act. Here, in this situation, it was very clear. It was declaration, let's put the rockets and let's invade them. And that was clear, it's transparent for everybody that Russia invaded Ukraine, and even this fact is already enough, but it's not the only one. Second is that, geography matters. You have a terrible military conflict inside Europe, yeah? So if, God forbid, Russian tanks and Russia will occupy the entire Ukraine, it means that their forces will be touching the doorstep of European Union and NATO. And it is in the interest of the most developed countries in the world to keep the fight as far as possible from their house, which means as far as possible in the east of Ukraine. So, I mean, it's logical, right? If there is a crime happening in your neighbor's house, you are much more affected to this and you live through this much more as opposed to something happened in the other city. So that topic, yes. Another reason is that it's a huge conflict by volume. So we are talking here about almost 2 million people directly involved in the war, which is Russia, 145 million, and Ukraine, 44 million people. Yes. So both countries are really big and the scale of the war is huge. So if today I wrote the article, after World War II, the biggest military conflict in Europe were the Yugoslav War. So there, during the span of 10 years, there were like 130,000 casualties. Yes. In Ukraine, only now we are reaching, they're not exact numbers, but we're reaching at least 40,000 with civilians and military, within the matter of 3 months. So you can realize how huge is this. Yes, the siege of Sarajevo, which took 4 years and is described as one of the worst brutal siege of the urban population center, took the lives of over 5,000 civilians. The siege of Mariupol took the life of more than 20,000 people within 2 months. So this is just a different level of casualties here, which also makes the impact. And this is terrifying because we are only like 3 months, we are already like 3 months in the war and who knows how far it can go. Another part is that we are living in the media world. It's 2000s already. Ukraine is integrated into the global markets much better than Yemen or Afghanistan or Syria. Ukraine, like for us as a digital nomads, is the 4th largest outsourcing country in the world. Yeah, so there are a lot of like smart IT people, a lot of marketing people, crypto. We have like in addition to the like regular like tank and bullet army, we have a media army, we have a cyber army. People are attacking websites. They do some smart and fancy promotional activities. So that's like plays also a major role. Also, there is a huge diaspora of Ukrainians around the world. So only in Canada, we've got like almost 2 million Ukrainians living. In the US, over 1 million Ukrainians. All around Western Europe, like let's say 5 million Ukrainians. So they push from their side. You know, like there are so many movements which in general makes it different and in general makes an impact for this war to stay on the news for so long and to completely like affect I will not afraid to tell every citizen of our planet, because this is the single most important historical event after the fall of the Iron Curtain. This is the single biggest military conflict after World War II, and this will define the new world order. So that's why it's so crucial and so important.
Yeah, we totally agree on that, and I'm really thankful that there's people like yourself there on the ground continuing to share that with us. One of the things you mentioned that I also wanted to get back to is this really inspiring, collection of stories coming out of Ukraine, and I think your President Zelensky has been one of the people that's kind of been the PR campaign of this in a lot of ways. He's become like this face of encouragement and fight, and I think the whole world's kind of rallied around. I'm curious to hear from your perspective, because you sort of touched on this earlier, but we could go a little deeper on it here. What has that resurgence been like from those early moments when you said, people were terrified, in the first few days, and then you kind of transitioned into this element of like, okay, we're fighting back. Actually, we've got a chance in this. We're gonna push back, to like, okay, now we're kind of living our life a little bit normally in certain parts of the country. So there's a level of confidence and safety that's obviously been established, which I think is kind of connected to this pushback and this fight that's been exhibited. So what has that been like from your standpoint? It's sort of a broad question, but I'm just curious to hear like how you could speak to that from your viewpoint, or also from the viewpoint of people that you're talking with on the ground there.
Everybody I know is doing something war related. So restaurant owners, they feed the civil defense units, or they take 10% of their profit and they send to the army. Guys who work in IT, they continue working in IT, outsourcing, but they keep buying all different things to the militias. People who were like taxi drivers, they go on the front and they do the logistics. Like I am a media guy. I completely shifted my activity and do something which is also very late. So basically, we experienced the very fast transformation of the entire economy towards the war needs. And I understand that this is something normally what is happening when there is war in the country, because for Ukrainian people, this is simply a question, live or die, and in order to survive, you will do everything possible and you will sacrifice everything. You will spend all your resources, all your intention and attention just to resist and win. So, I can tell that everybody is engaged in this war, and it's not only about the army, but it's about the people who are behind this army. When the war started, I and other friends of mine, I took my military ticket that we get after we graduate from the secondary school and went to the military facility just to check what is the status, how you're going to be inscripted and so on. And at one moment, there is a procedure, but so many people volunteered even without being called that the army could not process this volume of people. And there were lines of people waiting to get inscripted. So that's how everybody is committed. Yes. And it's hard actually to get into the army. I heard stories. People even have to bribe to get into the military unit, really everybody's doing something. I don't know even what to tell. We have stories of girls who set up OnlyFans accounts and donate, and get money to donate to the army.
Everybody's doing their part. As we said earlier, everybody's got their different skill sets. We've got to put it to use.
And this is fascinating because the real nations are born at war. Yes. And this is the process of purification of Ukrainian nation. And I never felt so high-spirited in the society when everybody is united towards a single goal. And that's, I don't know, I would be blamed for these words, but this is a beauty, if you can tell so, of the entire situation. And the taste of life is much sharper at the moment, I would say, for people inside. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I bet on some level there's there's this sense of unity and camaraderie and patriotism that you probably never experienced before, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And people laugh that Putin managed to unite Ukrainians, how Ukrainians wouldn't manage to do so ever before. Putin managed to unite the European Union, even though only half a year ago it was already shaking on all different sides. Putin wanted to push the boundaries of NATO away from Russia, but he's actually getting them closer with Finland and Sweden joining the alliance. So things didn't go according to the plan.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, this is totally backfired on him from many different angles, and I think the world is seeing that and relishing a little bit in that failure on his part. There's no doubt about that. On that note, actually, I think it would you mind sharing a little bit about your perspective on the relationship between Ukraine and Russia, and maybe even more personally, Ukrainians and Russians? There's an interesting, backstory there that I won't ask you to dive into the history of the two nations and everything, but on a sort of a basic level, I think it's interesting, what it was, a couple years ago and what it is today. And I guess how you interact with Russians and just generally speaking, it would be interesting.
Of course. So it depends how far you go to the history, but let's start from the Middle Ages and touch the topic of Slavs. So Europe is composed of a few different meta groups of people. And the three largest of those are Slavs, which are in the East, and the Germanic peoples, and the Latin. So the Latin, we are talking about the Southern Europe, Spain, France, Italy, and so on. The Germanic were the tribes that later followed into the modern countries of North Europe, all the Scandinavians, the Germany, obviously, the British, and so on. And then the Slavs, those are the Eastern counterparts that later originated into the Eastern, Western, and Southern Slavic countries. Western being the Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. Southern, all the former former Yugoslav countries plus Bulgaria, and eastern are Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Russia. So basically, we share a common history. Let's say since the last 1,000 years, then is the same faith, is the Orthodox Christianity, as opposed to Catholics being mostly widely spread in the Western Europe. And in the Middle Ages, there was a big proto-East Slavic state called Kievska Rus, Kiev, Ruthenia. The capital was in Kiev. Kiev, by 800s of our millennium, Kiev was a big, prosperous city, the largest in Eastern Europe. And this country, this kingdom, was destroyed by the Mongol invasion, by successors of Genghis Khan. So some tribes moved to the west, and some of them moved to the north. The western remains of this Kievska Rus, with the center in Lviv, the city where I am now, formed like the kingdom of Galicia, which was very attached to Western European countries. And the northern tribes, they formed around, later developed Moscow and started to originate into Russia. So all the way until 17th century, the historical areas of modern Ukraine were incorporated into Lithuania or Poland, meaning attached to the other European countries. And these areas started to be occupied by the proto-Russian forces. It was still back then the Moscow kingdom, only in the middle of the 17th century. So I'm talking about 1615 and later. So basically, together with Russia, Ukraine shares a history of last, 350 years. Yes, 350 years. And that was the start of the process of assimilation. So for many, many centuries, there were different imposing laws restricting using of Ukrainian language, Ukrainian culture, history, and so on. While the western part of Ukraine, where is Lviv, was enjoying more liberal rule of Poland or Austria, for example. And the first period when our country became united happened after World War II. People in the West were naturally more European. People in the East, they were because of historical reasons, closely related to Russia and adopted in many cases Russian language because of these different historical limitations. So from the Russian point of view, they see Eastern Ukraine as the historical land of Russia, even though I briefly explained to you how it is. But, people were watching movies, and even up until 10 years ago, Russian media, culture, and so on, I could say was kind of deeply integrated into Ukraine because of using the services, the economy, and so on. Many people in the East, let's say Odessa, Mariupol, Kharkiv, they are native Russian speakers. And for the Russian invasion, one of their justifications to invade Ukraine was liberating Russian-speaking population of Ukraine. So here is an important topic. Think of Mexico invading Texas to liberate Spanish-speaking Americans, or France invading Switzerland to liberate French-speaking Swiss. So that's how absurd is it? And even though if people in the east of Ukraine, they were still tolerating Russian relations. Some of them have families there. Even after the annexation of Crimea, there was still some exchange happening. So when this invasion started, the most brutal, especially for natives of a Russian-speaking area of Ukraine, was that if you want to liberate us, why the hell are you destroying our city? This is the most absurd. Why is he putting Mariupol under siege or shelling Kharkiv constantly, even at this very moment? If before the war, he could still somehow count on their tolerance and support, now this is absolutely unacceptable. And many people in the east of Ukraine who were native Russian speakers, they simply started voluntarily to convert and start speaking Ukrainian, not to associate with Russia at all. So when this war started, and also our countries, they were sharing a lot of pop singers, a lot of this modern culture. So let's say many famous Ukrainian YouTubers who were doing the material in the Russian language were superstars in Russia and so on. So when the war started and it became obvious that this is not the way how brother is visiting his brother. Like it's like really like killing and aggressive and so on. There was a big campaign among Russian-speaking Ukrainians to reach their audience in Russia to explain that like this is not a special military operation. This is war, and our cities aren't burned. But they somehow, by miracle, they couldn't reach their logic, their heart. Oops, sorry. So let's say Selena Gomez, who is well known around Spanish-speaking world, right? And she tells, like in Spanish, like, look, guys, you invaded the territory, like my sister is trapped in Mariupol. So this like guy or the girl with like 10 million Instagram followers is telling this to his audience in Russia, showing all the proofs, and they still like, we don't believe, like this is not possible. Then after 1 month, they simply gave up because it doesn't make any sense. So after this, obviously, it's very hard to talk about anything. Many Russian people who didn't support the war, they left, and media doesn't speak about this, but around 4 million Russians fled Russia, not to associate with the government. Surprisingly, Putin receives around 80% of the support, which is crazy. And it looks like that the entire population is brainwashed. And like you, me, all the other people in the modern countries, we don't understand this. And I don't understand how it's possible, but looks like the country is falling back to the medieval ages, and the situation where all the like major businesses are leaving. They cannot use their bank cards around the world anymore, and who knows what will happen after this. This is like it's really hard to simply like you tell it's green, and somebody else is telling no, it's like game over. So I don't know.
Yeah, I can actually speak to this a little bit. I mean, I know some Russians who live in Russia and also live outside of Russia and have family there. And one of the most baffling things to them has been the sort of the way the propaganda there has worked. And I think it's really hard for someone who hasn't lived or worked inside of a country where there's a very strong propaganda machine that's literally controlled by the government to understand how controlled it is. I have had that experience a little bit. I won't go into that because it's not a very important part of the story. But I mean, I have been behind the scenes of a media organization run by the government and seen how that works. And it's pretty mind blowing to see the level of influence they have. And so some counterparts, some people that I know that live in Russia or have family there and can speak to it. One of the most surprising things to them has been that there is more of an acceptance of what's happening than they would like to admit, than they would like to believe. They're like, wait, you guys are actually believing what you're seeing? I mean, you're being fed a story here, but you all still believe it. Uncle Ted, you believe this story? And it's like, yeah, I believe it. We're moving in to liberate, this is a special operation to liberate. And then, on the flip side of that, there are many that want to get out or disassociate that are unable to do so, or that have already gone and done so. I mean, that 4 million number is probably a small fraction of the number who would love to just be able to pull up and go. But the fact is you have roots there, you have family, you have investments, you have kids, there's all sorts of things that would keep you there despite your hatred for what the government is doing. So that is a part of the story that, I was just finished real quick and say that is a part of the story that I think gets a little bit that, it's easy to let fly under the radar. We're very focused on the Ukrainian people and the conflict is in Ukraine, but there are Russian people on the other side of the fence who are being affected in different ways. And that story is interesting in its own right.
It is interesting. I can tell that there is like the paradigm that Russian people are also can be victims of this situation, yes? And then, like, the question is, why don't they resist? Why don't they take over, right? So Ukraine, in the last 30 years, lived through two revolutions, one peaceful revolution, one revolution with blood, and now we have this war. And every time when people were not satisfied, they were going on the streets. And that's how the democracy works, right? Russia had the last revolution happened in Russia was in 1917 when the Tsar, the emperor, was overthrown and the Soviets came. So it was like the movement of the proletarian people. So many Ukrainians now are frustrated about that the situation that happened could be possible to solve if the Russian population will take over by themselves. But, like we understand that this is not possible under those circumstances. And as you told, it's wonder how the propaganda machine works. And I have even here application from my personal experience. So one part of my family is living in Donbass in the east. He, the brother of my grandfather, traveled there in the 50s, started working on the coal mines and eventually made a family. So they were visiting us a couple of times during the 2000s, being impressed with Lviv, like the standard of living in Western Ukraine, which is higher than in those areas and so on. And, we are family. We were always like making an apartment for them, like treating well and so on. So when in 2014, invasion in Donbass started and their city near Donetsk became under the occupation of this local of the Donbas resistance with the support of Russian army, we told them okay, if you feel it's dangerous or you don't want to stay there, please come to Lviv. We're going to host you and provide you everything you need. And they simply refused to go because they told that they will be killed here in Lviv, in Ukraine, being our family members, and not even hearing situation, but also personally visiting those areas here. And this is already very, very strange. And they're still there. So we lost contact with them. And there are countless stories like this when families got simply broken up.
These are some of the micro headlines that, fly under the major macro headlines that you just don't get to hear in the mainstream media. And I think why it's so important you're doing the work you're doing, because these are the kind of stories that keep the greater story alive, I think. And it's sad to say that that's on any level necessary. As you said, we have a short attention span these days, but it's really, I don't know, it's really nice that you're willing to share those kind of things with the audience. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's how crazy the world can be.
Yeah. Are there any, I think it might be a good place to wrap it up. I imagine we could probably just talk for hours and hours about this. I'm sure there's plenty that you can share, but I feel like we've done a good job sort of setting the stage, what life is like there right now. And I hope one day in the not too far off future, we can have you back and you can tell us, we can have a more typical about abroad discussion about Ukraine and all the wonderful culture and history and cities to visit and things to do there and the people, because I know there's so much of that there, which I'm sure is what you would really love to be talking about. And so hopefully we get back to that point in the not too far off future.
Absolutely. So just to wrap things up, the first thing is remember that there is Ukraine, and remember that Ukrainians are fighting at the moment for those values that in some extent are already forgotten by Western countries. Yes. So this is very important. Follow me. I hope you will provide all the links, social media profiles next to this podcast. Orest Zub, very easy to find everywhere. And at the moment, and I'm planning to continue, reporting from Ukraine. And also it depends what type of work are you doing or in which business are you in. I'm not asking you to do some donation because they've already been told a lot about this. I don't ask you to sacrifice something. Simply think of how can you supplement your already existing work, procedures, experience, and make it Ukraine relevant. Maybe you can hire some Ukrainians in your business. Maybe if you are into logistics, you can shift some part of your activity to deliver stuff to Ukraine. I received an email from one guy who is in the water purifying filter business. Yes, and he told we dedicate 10% to filters in Ukraine and so on. So simply think how can you add your activity with something Ukraine related, and this small contribution will make a big difference if many people all around the world will do this. Because as we told during this conversation, this is not war only about Ukraine. This is the war about making our world a better place.
100%. Well said. You're right. We will link to all of your social handles, websites, everything in the show notes. So anybody that wants to follow your work more closely can access that information very easily right now from the show notes. On that note, are there any particular links or resources you would mention? And if they don't come to mind off the top of your head, I'll get them from you later and we'll add those to the show notes, or we'll do our own research. But if you know of any particular places where listeners should go to donate, to contribute, to find ideas about about how they can contribute, is there anywhere in particular they should head?
We will add the link. I'll add you the link with the exhaustive resources of possible donation. However, there is one important thing to understand. Military is the number one priority, because if Ukraine will lose the war on the military field, all other objects and subjects don't really matter. Yeah. So if you want and if you can, donate to the military of Ukraine first, and we will provide the link. Second step is what I told you. Yeah, add if you want to do something else, just look for other organization that resonates to you. Children, pets, older people, water purifier, food. We will provide the link with the exhaustive resource list of different organizations you can add. Choose something that resonates to you and stay with Ukraine.
Excellent. Orest, thank you so much. Appreciate the work you're doing. I'm really enjoying isn't the right word, but I'm appreciating the work that you're putting out there, the content and being there on the ground. So thank you so much. Thanks for taking some time to share so much with us here, and stay safe and be well.
It's a privilege to be your guest, and thank you for the support. See you soon.
Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the two following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed, or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and we will see you again next week. Thanks again. Hasta luego, amigos.